Good morning and welcome to the third and final day of the Future of Biopharmaceutical Analysis Summit 2026. I'm your host, I'm Ian Betteridge, Head of Content for European Pharmaceutical Review, and it is my pleasure to kick off with a session on digital transformation in pharma manufacturing. It's obviously always a hot topic, and we've got some great panelists here to discuss it with today. To introduce my panelists, we have Raminder Pal Singh, who's Global Head of AI and Gen AI Practice for 2015 Visioneers. Zio Rahman, Associate Professor of Pharmaceutical Sciences at Texas A&M University, and Doris Asige, who's Sterile Manufacturing Consultant Pro Pharma and Head of Business Development for DL Bean Group. Now, digital manufacturing is a very, very broad topic, and I think one of the challenges with it is that it applies to many, many different aspects of pharmaceutical development, drug discovery, all the way through to manufacturing. And what I'd like to start with is a little bit of an icebreaker. So just in turn, just to note actually at this point that Sia is having a few technical difficulties, so he will appear on screen at some point. But before he does, I just want to turn to Raminder Pal and to Doris. So Doris first, when it comes to digital transformation, what does it mean to you? And is it something that fills you with excitement, dread, or everything all at the same time?
When I hear digital transformation, I don't immediately think about AI or digital twins. I think about better decisions in our works. It's about using technology to make pharmaceuticals manufacturing smarter, to improve our work, to make them more predictive, and ultimately safer for patients. Absolutely, it's a great achievement that we are living, and it excites me. But it also reminds me that technology alone doesn't deliver value. So success depends on how we can implement, how we can understand both the science and the technology. So in our industry, um, digital transformation should never be an innovation or its own sake. It should always be together with personnel involved in every step.
And I think that's a really important point that you mentioned, that ultimately all of this is at the service of the patients. And it's very, as scientists, easy to kind of not necessarily forget that, but we get excited by the science and we get excited by the technology. And we have to remember that it's all about ultimately the patients and delivering the best outcomes for them. Raminder Pal, what about you? I know that I'm going to guess that you're going to be excited about this.
Yeah, listen, thank you. I think Dice's answers really put a very good context around it. It's very hard to add to a good answer like that. I'll take a different perspective and give the same answer that she gave from a different perspective. Let's think about building cars. Let's think about Henry Ford, right? So if you go to MBA school these days and they talk about process line manufacturing, here we're talking about manufacturing, right? And so manufacturing and how manufacturing got to where it was, and we talked about the reproducible moving process line. That's a Henry Ford innovation from the 20s. And 1920s, sorry, not our 20s, 1920s, bit back brain. And it's used, we learn about the notion of how over hundreds of years, manufacturing has gone from a village industry to a process line, to a moving process line, to automation. And the word automation was very big in the 60s and 70s, in semiconductors in the 80s, 90s. Here we're talking about digital. So for me, this is about industrial revolution. And industrial revolution carries massive pivot. And Doris is absolutely correct that, you've got all these, her answer was about jobs to be done. It was about the holistic picture. It was about the patient as well. Well, that's part of the holistic picture. But the point is, all these you carry through. But if we narrow just specifically to the notion of manufacturing lines and the digital transformation in manufacturing lines, it's the same sort of strength of transformation that we get from Ford vehicles from the 1920s. And we see that across any sort of manufacturing line you've got. But I do want to add one thing, though, on a little bit on the skeptical side, because I think it is important we all know that there's plus and minuses. When I was working for IBM This is about a decade and a half ago. I was in the States and I was working for IBM Research in New York. And we did some data mining for a pharma company, manufacturing line. And we're doing this data mining and we're predicting. So this is the word AI, ML, and all this stuff. It could get confused and we should separate them out. This is data mining prediction work. And we're predicting errors, bugs, faults in drug production. And the company turned around and said, actually, we don't want to know. Because as soon as we know, we have to declare. And I don't know if you guys, everybody in this industry knows that problem, right? That's the same problem we have with real world evidence. We don't actually want to know real world evidence because as soon as we know real world evidence, we've got to go tell the FDA about it. So there's a certain amount of reality about digital transformation which scares the system. If I can build it and I can build it on time and I can build it at pace and I can build it under my cost curve, that's all I need. Why would I digitize it if it's going to tell me more information and then get me in trouble because I know more than I probably want to? So you've got these two parts, which in a heavily regulated industry, you need to be really careful about.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really interesting one. And from my perspective, AI and digital transformation always fills me with both hope and dread, because the hope is that you can do something really spectacular and you can change the processes and you can really streamline things and affect people's lives a lot quicker, which is what we all want to be able to do. And the dread comes from not doing it properly. And I think that historically, doing big transformations in business of any kind has always been quite difficult. Digital, I think, is no exception to that. So just to move on, I want to sort of focus for a little bit of time on kind of the state of play and kind of why digital transformation in pharma is a bit harder than it looks. And we all know it's hard, but I think it's actually harder even than that. So to start with, remember, you've helped a lot of organizations implement AI, and obviously in your background at IBM, that goes beyond AI in different kinds of sectors and not just pharma. When you look at pharma, how does it compare for digital maturity, and what specifically makes it harder or maybe easier to sustain a genuine digital transformation here than in other industries of the same kind of size and complexity?
Thanks, Ian. That's a really good question. So in preparing for this, right, because this is a really loaded question, or say a load-bearing question, I put together some thoughts on for anybody who's attending. If you go to Swapcard and you go and look at the bottom of the speakers list, there's a link there, ai-mfg.vercel.app. And a lot of my thoughts are really well brought out in that, especially for this panel session today, that page. It's just a web page with a thinking. So please do refer to that as I make my comments today. So I think, and I'll come back to my comment a minute ago about, do people want digital transformation, or are people afraid about the implications of digital transformation? But I think there's another point, which is the cost curve, or the cost benefits of digital transformation. Remember, we're talking about manufacturing in this panel session. We're not talking about, discovering a new, early drug discovery compound, phase or something like that. We're talking about manufacturing. So I think it's not on the problem, the gap is created by, it's not on the top one or two pain points of the COO or CEO's head. So, if you're running an organization, remember I went to Liverpool in the UK, Liverpool National Healthcare Trust, and we were talking about, doing some AI stuff and this and that. And somebody reached out to me around the table and said, listen, if it's not in the top three things in the COO's mind of the Liverpool NHS Trust for that year, this will be a great conversation we have today, and there will be no further conversations. So the problem we have here is, I believe, is that people don't see the strategic benefit where they do see it in other industries, and that creates a gap. So in other industries, people will experiment because they see forward. We have sensors. Sensors are live in manufacturing in our world today. We have kind of, I would say, localized. You can see it on that web page I mentioned earlier. We have value proposition in a local space. Why? Because if you take a company, a big biopharma or whoever, it's a group of departments. And what happens, there's a group of departments, they have purview, a certain amount of spend, IT support, people, and then go off and however they operate, they have a mini culture. And they'll sometimes, some of them will actually want to experiment a bit more, crossing the chasm, as we learned, in terms of experimenting out with a bit of digitization, getting some more digital data, seeing the benefit. And other people will say, well, that's useful, but it's not in my top three, as I said earlier. And so you have this kind of classic that the organization as a whole, if you go up, doesn't view this as, hey guys, we have to get our head around this for manufacturing purposes, because we've got other things are just getting in the way. And what does that lead to? That leads to wait till next year type effect. But if local groups want to experiment within their local purview, what they're allowed to do and within their budget, sure, which means point tools get deployed, sensors, as we talked earlier, short loop runs within manufacturing or experimentation or validation. And then, of course, you have the biggest problem of all, which is GMP has to sit on top of all that, which means that, hey, cool, you can do something, but if it's not CGMP, current GMP compliant, no one's going to touch it with a barge pole. And that means that you have to bring in other parts of your other organizations and other groups into the room to be able to put it into quote unquote manufacturing deployment, product deployment. And that creates complexities which small groups don't really want to handle. They've got enough. Everybody's got less people, more to do, and they're being told AI will solve all their problems. So they've got less budget. So problem is that you got all these things, and why is this all created? Back to my initial point thesis that at the CEO level, it's not strategic in their top 2 or 3 things for their manufacturing groups to get past this problem. They will, go pay for, some fancy in silico lab work, or or some fancy ML work in drug discovery because they get that. They get that maturity's occurred, and that people are doing a lot of that. But manufacturing is a laggard. Pharma manufacturing is a laggard in this, and remains a laggard even over the last 10 years.
Doris, I just want to turn to you at this point, because I know you've got to leave us early, and you kind of work at the intersection of sterile manufacturing, regulatory compliance. When digital tools, kind of whether it's automated monitoring systems, electronic batch records, AI-assisted deviation detection, when they arrive in a GMP environment, as Raminder Pal touched on then, what does the regulatory interface actually look like? Is GMP compliance a blocker for digital innovation, or is it more like this provides a useful framework for us to work within?
So this is a little bit complex because there is often maybe a misconception that GMP slows innovation, but I think it's different. GMP itself is not an obstacle, but poorly implemented digital transformation might be. The revised Annex 1, the new draft that was published in 2022, we all know that brought many, many new requirements. And the transformation in new technologies going from, let's say, the old systems, machines in RAPs, restricted access barrier system, or in isolators means for sure an improvement in technology, in the security, in the reducing the risks for contamination, avoiding the human, let's say, error or penetration and influence in many processes. But and also together with Annex 11, data integrity principles, 21 SFAR Part 11, all of them provides a framework that ensures digital technologies improve product quality while maintaining patient safety. Always in sterile manufacture, this has very impact and is important because always we tend, let's say, to lower as much as possible the margin for error, because even a small error has a huge impact. But automated environmental monitoring, for example, can have many benefits, can electronic batch records as well as AI-assisted deviation management. But it's not only the tools, also the data should be appropriate and efficient, because AI system without appropriate data cannot be helpful. But on the other hand, I think it will be needed a little bit more time for companies to adopt all these, let's say, new requirement and this digitalization area, because it's not so easy to implement in every steps. But because our digitalization needs for sure and also change our responsibility. Every computerized system must be validated. Every algorithm, every Excel electronic record must be justified, explained. And so it is very important to take, let's say, a little bit more time in order to be able to implement all these new aspects. But for sure, these technologies can significantly enhance, enhance contamination control by providing continuous monitoring, faster detection of trends, can improve decision making, for example, with rapid new technologies of environmental monitoring or microbial detection. We now can achieve data and results within days instead of 2 or 3 weeks. Even and all in this case, when we have, let's say, bad results, we can take decisions in a faster way and avoid a greater impact. On the other hand, environmental monitoring system automated can avoid human impact, human error, or the influence in false result, positive results somehow. So it's a complex, it needs time, but it's a mechanism that should build confidence step by step, and for sure it creates the governance necessary for organization to adapt AI responsibly and sustainably. So regarding the tension between the rapid digital innovation and GMP validation, I believe this is a largely phased dichotomy as well. So we don't need to choose between innovation and compliance, but we need to evolve in our validation approach in order. So instead of validating software once every few years, we should adopt risk-based life cycle validation, continuous verification, so robust change management or performance monitoring. So it's not the goal to simply digitalize existing process, but to improve, to change the mindset and to build intelligent manufacturing system that remain compliant, transparent through their life cycle.
I think that's well said. Sorry, that's really well said, and I think that connects well with what I was saying, which is to do all that, as you said, continuous management, continuous verification. To do all that requires larger permissions, larger organizational involvement, and so that means that the large organization, therefore going all the way up to the top, needs to see it as a strategic priority. Um, for example, 10 years ago, they started building computational biology teams, right? If you remember, these teams started popping up. Those are dictated from the top. We'd hire people, we'll split people out, we will create teams, da, 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 da. That was all in drug discovery, right? So that sort of momentum and push needs to happen here so that the things that Doris is saying are possible.
Yes, but also we should be, let's say, aware that companies need time to adapt to these new challenges and new
Yes.
Technologies, because there are many investment to be done, many new technologies to be applied, many new machines, equipment, many
Yes.
trainings behind that, and validation, maintenance, all of them has its cost. So we should be realistic even in that part. And this is, let's say, the bad part, that there are many companies, especially producing sterile products, that maybe have been fermented because they are not able to maintain all this pressure and all this new investment. I saw an article when was saying that does AI could, let's say, replace the qualified person that is an important role and position in pharmaceutical industry. And I think absolutely no. So at the end, we should, let's say, rely on AI, but the final decisions remains to a qualified person. So one of the most important principle in pharmaceutical manufacturing is that cannot be delegated all the work to an algorithm at the end. So artificial intelligence can analyze thousands of process parameters, detect trends, prioritize investigation, can identify the risks. However, the final GMP decision to release the batch on the market, I think, should remain always to a qualified
I think, Doris, that's a very good point. But I would argue, I think that misses the point of AI. Your last phrase, your last statement misses what AI is. You described AI as a statistical engine which generates numbers, and then a human looks at the numbers, makes a decision, right? And then you also described that we don't replace the human. That's fair, but where there's 100 humans, tomorrow there'll be one human. We haven't replaced humans, just 99% less humans. And secondly, your comment misses out the whole Gen AI last 5 years hasn't been about those statistical pushes. It has been about I can look at knowledge, I can look at reports, I can look at transcripts, I can look at the data as well, and I can reason and I can produce a view, a proposal with evidence in an hour, in a minute, which that single person can look at without much work at all. So you're creating huge, huge productivity, not just on the number crunching, but also on the reasoning and absorption of reports, reasoning, understanding of a situation. Still agree the human makes the decision, but a decision can be made in 1 minute. It doesn't take 100 people to make a decision if 99 people's work is being done by machines, and it will be.
But here is a social impact that we should consider as well. So it's not so easy to, let's say, to say peoples and operators that have worked for many years that now you are totally replaceable. So
Yes,
even this shift should be done, let's say,
agreed.
slowly.
Agreed. Totally agree. No, I'm not doing an Elon Musk statement here. I'm saying that, or I don't know if you guys know what, was it Box.com did, or they announced 40% people are sacked because AI is going to replace them overnight. No, I agree. This is a transformation. It has to be done with culture and with business governance in mind,
Absolutely.
which means as a transition, not as a step function. Point I'm making is that with the onset of large language models, and I'm heavily invested in large language models, this has become a completely different game. And with the notion of reasoning, these things can reason very, very complex situations very, very fast.
Fantastic. And just before we move on for 1 second, Zia has been able to join us. Zia, can you try your microphone so I can see if we can hear you yet? I'm going to guess that means that it's not working. So just to jump back into that conversation for a second before we move on, Doris, I'd be really keen to hear your perspective on this. But from one of the things that I think we sometimes forget is exactly that part about cultural impact and the kind of economical impact of what we're doing. But there is also a kind of angle to that, which I think often gets forgotten, which is if, as Raminder Pal said, instead of having 100 people, you've got one, then where is the next generation of knowledge coming from? Can we actually work with that smaller pool of genuine human experts?
For that reason, I said that it's difficult for me. So we, for example, even in our company, we've start trying to simulate batch records going from manual to automated. Other, let's say, process trying to make them as much as possible automatically. And for companies and from, let's say, small countries, when most of the processes are still semi-automatic and mostly manual, it's a big challenge to go fully automated robotic system, and apart their benefits and the improvement. For that reason, it's a huge social impact to say operators that has 20 years working in a process, and they believing that they are doing in the right way, and generally the products are safe, are okay to be, let's say, replaced with machines and so on. On the other hand, an interesting aspect that I have heard and read was even that uh, also the auditors will be automated. So with this new technology, maybe even the auditors that will audit the companies will be through AI systems. So there will not be need so real inspectors to come and visit the company, but just with some automated system through, let's say, some typical verification will be done, as well the inspections and other aspects. So it's a transformation and it's a revolution and needs time to be implemented in every aspect.
Totally agree. I think it's spot on. And also on the auditors one, I think information will be generated at speed and at very low cost. But there are business governance decisions which humans will always make because they report to the directors. So if you have a contract, somebody has to get sued at the end of it if there's a problem. And only humans will get sued, not machines. We know this, right? So I think there will always be humans. But I think that's a false discussion. We all know there's got to always be humans. The question is, 1 in 100 humans means you've got a transformation. But I think you're totally right, Doris. It's going to take time because that person who's sitting on the line, who's got 20 years of process understanding of how that line works, is going to say, cool, take it, good luck. And you can talk to them, you can capture all their knowledge, but all that nuanced tacit knowledge, it's super impossible to lose. On the other hand, these people are retiring anyway. And AI first is becoming the way things are happening. And so workflows will change. In 20 years' time, we won't be running manufacturing in the same way we're running it today. We'll be thinking about AI first workflows, right? We won't be designing workflows saying, here's a machine, there's a human. We'll be saying, here's a machine, here's an AI agent in the actual lab design from day -1. Right. And so these AI first thinking will start changing the way the new workflows are designed, optimized, and implemented and deployed. And we can't see that because we're seeing in our niche, right? We're seeing our bits. All we see is mess and noise. But the people who are looking at this fresh are seeing it that way, or should be seeing it that way.
And not all the companies are ready, so they need time to implement all these obstacle, not just cost, not just investment, but social aspects and so on.
You're totally right. And I'll give you an example there, Doris. Anybody seen the NVIDIA RTX Spark announcement? So NVIDIA announced they're in the laptop game now. Okay, so they're competing, of course, with Intel machines and MacBooks and this and that. And I'm looking at it going, that's a bit stupid, right? And then I watched a YouTube video yesterday where the guy tries to explain why NVIDIA are doing it. Well, not whether it will work or not. And because there's Windows on that machine. So you've got a Windows machine with an NVIDIA chip, which does all this AI stuff on it. And it's a laptop, and it looks like a MacBook when you get there, right? And then, of course, through resellers like HP and Dell and stuff like that. Why? And it turns out it's an ecosystem play. What they're trying to do is line up the drivers, the application vendors, all the players, so that they can build a new ecosystem supply chain for the future, for a new way that laptops should be used and deployed. And it will take time. And there's an analogy between what they're doing, because it's NVIDIA, right, $5 trillion company, and the discussion we're having now.
Doris, I think this is probably just about the point when you need to head off. So thank you very much for your contribution so far.
It's been a pleasure for me.
Excellent stuff. And Rinderpal, I think it's just you and me at the moment. Zia is trying to get his technical problem sorted out with Tony in the background. So we've got lots of ground and lots of fertile ground still to cover. And I just want to talk a little bit about uh, basically kind of what's actually working. So you mentioned digital twins earlier on,
Yeah.
and it gets used very, very loosely. So it can be a process simulation model, it can be a real-time sensor fed quality predictors, it can be a full virtual replica of an entire facility. Um, in a pharmaceutical context, though, what would be genuinely useful? What would a genuinely useful digital twin actually need? And is that even possible?
So, of course, there's going to be a lot of opinion on that. So, in preparing for this, because it's a very good question, I had to develop a viewpoint. So, this viewpoint doesn't mean it's the only answer. It's just my viewpoint. So, I view digital twins, which are simulation engines when you get there. If you go back to statistics class 101, you learn about descriptive statistics. You learn then the next step is predictive statistics, and then you learn next step is simulatory statistics. You simulate the thing, right? And that's what we're doing here. I think they're design tools. That's
Mm,
how I view them. So I don't. So because you got to think about what's the job to be done. Again, you go to business school, you learn about value in two levels. What is the feature function value, and then what are the business benefits? And the business benefits are different from the feature function value, right? It's not how fast does it move, or how quick can you click it, or what does it do? What does it pop out? It's who cares and how much money do they make, or how does it save them on a business sense? So you've got to think about the business benefits when you're doing design. And I'll come back to, you mentioned earlier about my various industries I've worked in. So I worked in semiconductors, did PhD, then worked for 10, 15 years in semiconductors in the US. And in semiconductors, you have this thing called these behavioral languages. And behavioral languages became a very big thing in the late 90s into the 2000s and still today. And what they did is so you could take a semiconductor chip, which has all these, first it had hundreds, thousands, then millions, then tens of millions, then billions of these little transistors running around. And, designing that can be a bit of a mess, right? You have these things called systems on chips, where you have different blocks. And I mean, this is very messy and very complex. And guess what? Very expensive, right? So the issue here is that how do you get to that design phase? Well, you get to these behavioral languages. And these behavioral languages allow you to design these blocks at a very high abstract level with sufficient detail, here's the key, that you can then make decisions about that, business decisions, because they are business decisions when you get there, about how you want to go implement, what you want to implement, and how you want to implement. And if you think about manufacturing, that's the same here. You've got a line, and when I was again, semiconductors, again, a lot of analogy there. I worked on a 300 millimeter process line. Those are these big lines which make these big round 12-inch chips, wafers, and then you dice them up into these little chips, and then you put them into packages and stick them in electronics. Anyway, these big 12-inch wafers, they go through 100 machines. They come in this big roll. You cut them up, you put them in, it slices it up, it does all the copper and the metal and then all the weird stuff to it over hundreds of machines, and it comes out with this little chip. And then you stick it in a package, as I say, a wafer package, a semiconductor package, and you ship it out. Point is that you want to simulate all that because it's really, really expensive to do. You've got the same issue. You want to simulate what's possible, and especially with the onset of AI. Because if you're going to take advantage of AI, the first question you'll ask, which is the question you asked earlier somewhat, which is, how do I take advantage of AI? So I digitize, let's theorize out 3 years. I digitize, and by the way, go look at the website I shared, because I talk about this. You digitize AI, you digitize your fab, you stick AI on it. What will it look like? Well, it won't look like what it looks like today. That would be stupid. That would be saying I'm taking a human operated system and I'm automating it and making it smart, but effectively it's just a human operating system with a bunch of scripts on it. That's daft. So what would it look like? I don't know what it would look like. But how do you get to a theory, an idea, a business decision about what it could look like? That's where digital twins come in.
mm, mm. I think it's really interesting as well, because obviously I work across several different sectors, because I look after our drug discovery title and drug
Yeah.
target review, but also some in transport and in food manufacturing. Everyone has a really kind of different perception of what digital twins are and
Yes.
how they benefit that business. So, for example, in the airport industry, the big thing with digital twins is understanding passenger flow. That's kind of, everything they want to do is, we have this building. If we do this, how does that affect passenger flow? Does it get more people to the gates? Does it keep them in the retail areas
And
where
that's a
we want them
simulation,
to
though.
spend lots of
It's
money?
still a simulation at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Right.
Yes, yeah. And that's all they talk about in terms of digital twinning.
Okay.
Um, Not quite all, but it's the main thing. And kind of that's what I mean about it being different things to different people. And I
Yes.
wonder if that is also true just within pharma manufacturing. You've highlighted, I think what the C-suite view of digital twin in pharma manufacturing is, which is we get a model and we can tweak this thing here and it will, give us a different output and we can experiment. And are there other areas where actually digital twinning could come in interesting, even going back to drug discovery and trials?
Okay, so if you're going, so drug discovery trials, as you say, is a bit upstream.
Mm,
Even when you're looking there, you're still talking about simulation. So the real question you're asking is, what would be the business benefits one would want to see from a simulation in things like drug discovery and trials,
mm,
right? And I think for me, which again, all just kind of my view of the world, the loop which massively is being underplayed at that upstream phase is the knowledge which is downstream in trials. So you've got all these trials going on, you've got all this data being collected, and bringing that knowledge back into your upstream early drug discovery programs. So that back loop, we're very good at for loops because for loops are linear and they tend to be quote unquote toll gate operated, so it's none of your business. You work it to animal, or you work animal, or you work trial one. You don't care about what happens next. So you're living in a very windowed world. But when you do it back, you're doing back from trial 3 all the way back to almost an academic setting in early drug discovery. And that's a very different behavior on people, but there's massive knowledge stuck downstream. And I think the ability in digital twins to understand that business impact of doing that, because remember, at the end of the day, you're going to make decisions, and those decisions cost money. And someone's got
mm,
to call the shot on do we do this and how do we do this? And they have to see something. And again, back to my semiconductors guys with those behavioral modeling, we used to call them executable models. So we call them digital twins here. I kind of prefer the notion of executable models. What I'm building an executable model of a system which helps me make decisions. You call that digital twin if you want to, but the only reason it's a digital twin is because it has sufficient information that I can label the word twin on it. It's digital anyway, but I can call it a twin because there's sufficient information, maybe 60% information, maybe 70. Stochastically, it's good enough that whatever it says will help me make a decision. It's a simulation model, and that's back to behavioral models back in the days, back 20 years ago when I was doing.
mm. I think related to this and the kind of bridge between what we're going to talk about next, which is specifically looking at LLMs and what we've been talking about so far. Twice yesterday in a panel on contamination and on environmental monitoring, the notion came up that companies are being quite risk averse now, especially when you think about nitrosamine contamination. We're now at the point where people are effectively abandoning drugs at the manufacturing stage because they're just going, it's too much of a risk to have nitrosamine contamination. And these are perfectly good molecules. They are perfectly good drugs that are just being thrown away. And one thought that came up from that panel was, okay, can we actually use AI, LLMs, any kind of digital process whatsoever to almost give a bit of reassurance? So, you can kind of use it as a model and go, how much contamination is there going to be really? So that you're basing it on a better view of risk than just going, that looks too risky to me.
Yeah,
And everyone got quite keen on that. I wonder what your thoughts are on that kind of use of AI and digital modeling generally.
right. So the term is evidence package.
Mm,
So everything we do when we make decisions as business owners or business leaders in any business is based on an evidence package. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. I'm going to make a decision. What do I know? That's an evidence package. In biopharma, whether you're upstream, preclinical, early to animal to trial 1 or downstream trials, or then downstream to manufacturing, marketing, go to market, all that market access, all those things, you're making spend decisions based on evidence packages. So the question
mm,
is really, can we use these fancy AI large language models, which is the last 5 years of innovation, really? Because the other stuff hasn't really innovated. It's cool, but nobody's paying attention. I mean, you've got better predictive models for certain, and you've got a better. I review. I'm on the board of the SALS Journal for Discovery editing board, and review papers about bringing models together with like high throughput screening and things like that. So a lot of interesting thing happening on the traditional AI machine learning world, which is very important, statistics, machine learning stuff. But what's changing the paradigm is large language models. We all know, we will talk about it. And if we're not using Claude or ChatGPT, which is, by the way, the evil tool. You can use Claude, please don't use ChatGPT. But if we're not using these tools, then we're probably missing that. We don't read the news. The point is that can they improve the evidence package? And the answer is absolutely. But what you have to accept is that you're making a decision. There's a headline. You've got data. That's what's already available. And digitization gives you more data, but that's a cost to getting more data, you see. So you can't just say, oh, I want more data. Well, give me a year, give me $10 million and I'll get you more data. No, I've got to make a decision in the next week. So you've got a headline, you've got some data, that's hard evidence package. Then you've got soft evidence package, which is where can you push the buttons on Claude and a bunch of 10,000 papers or a whole bunch of transcripts or a whole bunch of documents we've got internally, tell me more, which adds to that hard evidence, doesn't support it necessarily, adds to that package, but it's a soft evidence package. So my last company, I ran a company called Incubate Bio. It's a small startup. We failed after 3 years. But the idea is we would produce using causal inference algorithms, soft evidence for upstream, compound decisions in early clinical. So absolutely, you should be using soft evidence packages. That's a key low-cost value of large language model systems, Gen AI systems. I'll give you an example. I know something. I've got a headline or perspective opinion. It's backed by this data. There's no argument. Team did a great job. We did some predictives on that as well. Predictive analysis, great. In addition, now I've gone off and I've scraped PubMed. I've looked at 1,000, 10,000 papers, and also I've looked at all my stuff in big biopharma. They use SharePoint. I looked at all my SharePoint records and my ELN internal stuff, and I've got a whole bunch of other stuff I want to say as well. So I've added that nice deep package, the soft package. Now, the reason I call it soft package is because you want to differentiate it from the hard package, because the hard package is absolute data. This isn't data, this is inferred insights with reference and this and that, but it's sort of a bit wishy-washy in that it doesn't directly come specific to the headline itself, but it gives that soft feeling to the headline. So it lowers the risk emotionally and it gives the comfort, but it's not something which a governance board will say, well, we believe in, but it is something to sway if you're 5-10%, straying across the decision line.
And I think that was the point that we got to when we talked about contaminants in particular, but the same is true, I think, of EN, which is that it's not going to give you the decision. And, when we talked earlier about kind of the impact of AI, a lot of what we think of, certainly a lot of things that that the C-suite thinks of in terms of the use of AI is around eliminating some of those people along the pipeline who actually take decisions. And what I think you're saying, and I agree absolutely, is it's not about eliminating the human decision. It's about filtering so that the human decision has got a little bit more steer, but also that there's a little bit of a kind of, I think there's a garbage filter, because I always think old school computational, garbage in, garbage out. So there's a little bit of a garbage filter that is taking away all the kind of stuff which is not relevant to that decision.
Totally. Better decisions, faster, stronger evidence packages, both soft and hard, but decisions made by human. Decisions are governance topics. Governance is not. So again, back to my comment earlier, somebody's going to sue somebody if something goes wrong. That's our life. That's what we live in. And that person has to be human, can't be a machine. So you can't sue a machine. So there has to be a human making decisions at the point at which if a mistake is made, somebody's in trouble. So, and that would stay in place for some time still. The only time it will change, I believe, is if a Tesla taxi in, for example, Austin kills somebody, I'm making this up theoretically, guys, it kills somebody, and they work out through the US law courts who's responsible. They haven't got there yet. I mean, they're toying with it, but haven't worked out actually who's responsible. And I'm talking about Tesla taxi. No, in fact, I'll even go further. A Tesla car, which is owned by one guy, which is then used by another person as a because they've got all these different business models going out now. Who owns the problem, right? Today, if you have a driver's license and you drive a car and you're in an accident, somebody's hurt, you own the problem. Your insurance will, because you started the problem. But if it's an automated vehicle and it wasn't even your vehicle and it happened, well, who owns it? Does Tesla own the problem? Does the person who owns the car? All these things need worked out. Until all that's worked out, you won't see these, and that's away from here. But it's the same problem. You won't see decision makers becoming real decisions, becoming machine decisions.
And I think that goes back to a point about that came up a little bit earlier. I think Doris addressed, which was around the speed of adoption and whether GMP actually kind of acts as a bit of a brake on that. And I know that the digital technologies tend to be iterative, and they tend to be iterative quite quickly. You try something, you iterate, you iterate, you iterate, you iterate. Is the pharma manufacturing industry ready to be iterative to the scale that other areas are when they go through digital transformation?
So that was the very first question you asked me today, and my answer was no. And I believe that GMP does suffocate innovation, but I would say that comes across as negative, and it shouldn't be a negative thing, right? These are careful processes, right? So there's a reason why you have GMP. Now, if you talk to the US administration about Europe, they'll say in general, regulation in Europe suffocates AI innovation. I would agree with that, not them, but the point. But in something like GMP, of course it suffocates innovation. But you make your point, Ian, is really fundamentally on the nose. AI is about iteration. You can't do AI as a plan. Oh, I'm going to do this and do that. You can't sit back. And I was listening to a radio podcast on this where the US view of life is that build AI, break a few things, then learn what you need to legislate. Right. The European version is, well, humans will get hurt, so legislate first so the humans don't get hurt. They're both right. There's nothing wrong with either of those perspectives. Those are both, by the way, politically worded perspectives because they miss the rest of what they do. But they're both right. The problem is of course it suffocates innovation. Absolutely. These are absolutely. So when I build stuff, I have 4 machines sitting here, right? I'm building stuff absolute speed, and I'm building iteratively. I don't make a plan for anything. Absolutely nothing, because while I'm working with Claude and I'm building the plan with Claude as I go along, but while I'm building it, I'm executing it, and then I'm testing, and then I'm rebuilding it. And the notion of code, for example, in software world, code has no meaning anymore. Building code is, I mean, if you've got a code, if you're a software engineer, you're out of job. Building code is like, I don't need to build code. I've got apps which build code for me in a second. So the assets themselves need to be built, tested, played with, and then pushed back and then deleted and rebuilt. That's iterative. You can't do that if GMP says, well, no, because to test it takes you 2 years, or you need the rest of the organization to test it. There needs to be a paradigm which allows incubation and testing before deployment, and the regulatory system needs to be cognizant and gives permission to that incubation and testing.
And that is a tricky problem to solve. This is obviously, and again, going back to the point I made right at the very start, our industry is one which people's lives depend on, and the risks involved for not just the companies, obviously they have huge risk involved in getting stuff wrong, but also fundamentally at the level of people's lives is something that we absolutely always have to keep sight of.
And perception as well.
Absolutely,
because this is massively political. Think in the UK, data leaks. Oh, these guys own our data now. I've forgotten the company which everybody hates, the US company. So they own our data now. NHS, yeah, that's the one. NHS sold all our data sort of. Well, That's rubbish. Let's stop them. The mayor of London. I'm going to shut them down for the. This is about the police stuff. I'm going to shut them down. I'm shut them down. Cool, but what else can we do? There's no other vendor out there. So either we do it and we get on with our job, or we don't do it and we live in the dark ages. Give us a
Mm,
choice here. The problem is politics will always perception that drives politics, and it will always trump. Take a small risk. And when you take a risk, small things can happen. You have to allow that. But you can't have the whole country. This can't be California where you do a census poll. What do? They do that whole poll thing. Every time they want to make a dumb decision, they go off and they do what do they call it when you do a poll of the whole
oh,
state?
a referendum.
Referendum. They referendum everything. I mean, how daft can you be? You can't do anything then because it costs you more money to do the referendum than it is to just roll the thing out, and because then and the law courts get involved. So the risk needs to be understood and needs to be messaged and needs to be accepted because there are powerful things at play if it works, and if it doesn't
Mm.
work, we'll keep a close eye.
And the interesting thing from one of yesterday's sessions that came out was that actually regulators understand the risks. Their risk, though, the risk that they are really looking at is the risk to the patient ultimately. Um, the pharma companies, obviously, they do care about the risk of the patient. That's something we all care about fundamentally, but they also have reputational risk, financial risk. And so if they get it wrong, it's almost three times as bad as just looking at the patient. So I got the sense from some of the conversations that actually the regulators are looking at this in the right way, with a level of risk, which is the most important level of risk. Sometimes companies are not as tuned in on that because they're also thinking of all the other risks involved.
I somewhat look, this is a very subtle conversation, so I'm not the right person, but I would disagree a little bit. I
Hmm.
think regulators are paid by the government, so they would be biased conservative, biased towards guys. Please don't break it because we've got enough trouble here. So just don't break it. There were back office discussions where if the regulator wants to take some risk, they're probably encouraged. Look, guys, not this year, not this year. Come on. And every large corporation in the world reports to its board of directors. They don't report to anybody else.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying they don't care about patients, but I think everybody cares about patients. And I would argue the NHS care about their patients. So cool. So people care about patients. Pharma, biotechs, they care about what? They only care about one thing, which is shareholders sit on your board and they put money into this and there are governance and you're out of job and this thing is going to tank. So think about something as simple as obesity. There are several players now. Capital value of these companies based upon some information about their drug leaking. I mean, Lilly is worth a lot of money now. Novo I think it was last year, they died 15% one day. And Novo, they tanked the Danish economy, or the Danish, at least the bourse, the stock market. I mean, these things, they're very, very big dollars here. These are not small dollars. When you're at that level on the obesity drugs, and the race is obesity drugs at the present moment, right? GLP-1, etc. It is all about perception and it is all about stock price. And it's not about the individual, the human, the patients. I mean, come on, really.
I'm going to agree to disagree, but that's fine. I just want to turn now, because we've only got a few minutes left before we want to turn to questions from the audience, and we've had some really interesting ones, but we've got time enough for more. So if you do have questions, please do put them in
Yes,
the
please
chat
do.
and the swap tool.
Please put your questions in, everybody.
Definitely, more questions the better. We thinking about the future, and I'm not talking about 30 years hence, 40 years hence. What do you think of the technologies that kind of in the current conversation are underappreciated in terms of their impact, and what's overhyped?
So I think it's the same answer for both, which is large language models. They are
Mm.
underappreciated and overhyped. They're overhyped. Well, they're overhyped. But come on, how are they not overhyped? I mean, every day, it's stupid, really, really. Um, And the valuation of these companies, $1 trillion valuations for Anthropic and for OpenAI, roughly, as they go to IPO, it's stupid. I mean, it's stupid money, and again, they'll make announcements just to play to their IPO price. And their claims here and there, although I think Anthropic do a better job of trying to rein it in a little bit, but their claims of what they can do is a little bit out there and a bit too much. And they've got an ecosystem of influencers. Remember, hype isn't just the company or the technology; it's all these LinkedIn folks and all these YouTube folks who are over promoting because they need money, so people watch their YouTube or to watch their LinkedIn thread. So all these people who need to be, counting the views are also hyping and adding up, and it's just mess. These things do certain things and they do them well. Now, why is it underhyped, though? This is a more interesting question. It's underhyped because they can do isolated jobs. I mean, I'm coming back to the website, the link I shared, and the earlier conversation we had here. They can do very specific things which are low-hanging fruit. I mean, if you're not using, and this is just my opinion out, guys, if you're not using Claude 4.8 Opus to drive massive, and I'm not talking about Claude Code, I'm not talking about coding conversation, I'm talking to software people, talk to normal scientists and process people and whoever you want, executives, whoever you want, just use the app. If you're not using it to extract, to reason, extract knowledge, to reason, to understand, to make decisions, you're missing a trick. You're missing a huge trick. And I'll just give you a perspective on this, guys. And this is a personal perspective, but it shows the power of these things, right? And don't underplay this one. So I'll give you a personal perspective very quickly. HMRC, which is the UK tax group, like you have the IRS in the US and HMRC in the UK, they sent me a letter 2 days ago saying, we've received your self-assessment, your tax return, your personal tax return. We need more information. Send us it. So I sent it by email, the information. They replied back the next day, which was yesterday, saying, you filed wrong. You owe us £32,000. I'm just, trying to live a life here. And so I phoned the guy up, lovely guy, HMRC, nice guy. I used to live in the States, so you just couldn't do that in America. Spent an hour, lovely guy, HMRC, very good, very professional. But he kept saying, look, the way it looks, you owe us £32,000 here. So I went off to Claude, my buddy Claude, and I live on Claude for a variety of things. And I spent a couple of hours with Claude dissecting. I took a couple of words which the HMRC guy said to me, just as context, and then I put in some information about what was going on, yada, yada. A couple of hours, round and round. I was in control. I'll be really clear. I was in control. I didn't say, give me the answer, and it gave me this correct answer. No, round and round. And after a couple of hours, it generated a viewpoint, let's say an evidence package. And I put that in an email, which is maybe 200 words, put it in an email. I sent it back to this HMRC guy because we have email exchange with the guy. And I said, look, can you look at this? And 200 words only, nothing else. He came back yesterday morning. So, sorry, I missed the days. The day later morning, which is yesterday morning. And he said, you're right, you owe us nothing. These are complex tax situations. No, it wasn't simple. Complex international tax involving US funds, UK funds, this and that, treaties and this and that. If you're not using Claude Opus 4.8 for a variety of things in your workflow, in your workplace, you are massively missing a trick.
Definitely, in terms of, and I think that gets to the heart of one of the, I think, divisions in how we use technology, which is that's kind of back office. That's the back office stuff, and that I think everyone understands. I hope everyone understands. That kind of stuff is so easy to automate.
And by the way, I don't think it's just back office. Wherever you are seeing reports, if you've got a workflow and you've got a flow and you've got to interpret a report coming off a machine, these tools are super cool, super advanced. You have to load them. You have to understand how to use them, the prompting and the context, and you have to get it a bit right and iterate it because it's a workflow. But you put them into your workflow. Sorry, Ian.
No, that's fine. One final question before we kind of move on to some questions from the audience. A friend of mine recently said that, and this was specifically about AI, but I think it's absolutely true for every kind of true digital transformation. He said, if all you're doing is bolting on a new technology to an existing workflow, you're missing out on about 80% of the value.
Yeah, totally. We talked about that earlier. Yes.
Yeah. And are there areas where you think we're already doing that in terms of pharma and pharma manufacturing? Are there things that we've implemented already where we're not actually getting most of
Yeah,
the
drug
value?
discovery. Drug discovery 101. Drug discovery has been a complete nightmare because people have said, oh, I can use AI to do this. You're stupid. I mean, sorry for the language. It's not that. It's sure AI can produce productivity value there, but then you're going to be arguing about, do I trust it? Don't I trust it? You miss that 80% value point that your friend told you, Ian. The point
Mm,
is that if you go to AI first companies, there's some like in Silicon Medicine, there were some good guys out there who are pounding away getting in this into position. They don't think like that. They don't think the way they go after those first early phases, which can be very messy, by the way. If you've got early drug discovery, it's this black box of stuff where you've got key opinion leaders, you've got academics, same people, and you've got a whole bunch of people who've got an opinion, and then you bought a compound your grandfather then, and it's a whole mess of rough stuff. You can clear all that out if you understood, okay, from day one, what process do we use? Clear our minds if we have a variety of capabilities in our place. In other words, let the capabilities drive the workflow design, back to the design comment we talked about earlier. Not, are we going to do it anyway? Are we going to stick some AI bolts on it?
yeah,
Complete
yeah.
mess. And if you want an example, look at a car. I'll come back car. How many parts do you think there are in a Tesla car? Right? We know the story. How many parts do you think there are in a BMW, petrol engine? Right? Which do you think is more risky when you get there? And I'm not talking about fires in the cars and that sort of stuff. I'm talking about you got maybe 100 parts in a Tesla car, and you've got maybe 100,000 parts in a BMW thing. And by the way, the BMW car has got a lot of software on it as well, so it's not just a
Mm,
software point. Um, and we miss the point, which is why most manufacturers of cars can't get into the whole notion of what an EV is, because they haven't thought about it from this, step back and start new. They can't do that. And Elon Musk calls this first principles, by the way, for anybody who looks up. First principles design.
yeah, absolutely. So I've got time to take a few questions from the audience. And the first one is it's more of a comment than a question, but I think it is a really important one,
Please.
which is that uh, artificial intelligence plus human intelligence equals quality intelligence. And obviously, as an industry, quality is the most important thing to us. Do you think there are exceptions to that? Are there areas where there is nothing that a machine can add to to human intelligence, or vice versa? There's nothing more for the person to add.
I think the point's well taken. The question misses the point.
Hmm.
So artificial intelligence, there's no such thing as artificial intelligence, right? This has no meaning. All an AI thing is a processing engine. What can it process? Numbers or text or images. So they're
Hmm.
processing engines. Now, the new LLMs have something called knowledge, world knowledge. So they train their big, trillion-dollar node neural networks with knowledge. So there's knowledge ingrained into that processing engine, but it's a processing engine when you get there.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
what it is. So I have a processing engine with some knowledge trained into it, but humans have other knowledge. They have experiential knowledge. They have nuanced knowledge, tacit knowledge, which I'm very big on tacit knowledge, by the way. I do a lot of work on tacit knowledge. And you can't capture that in a machine because the machine hasn't done it and seen it. Maybe it can bits and bobs it can pull off from Reddit and this and that, but it doesn't know if it's real. So humans have tacit knowledge. The real question is, how do you capture that tacit knowledge from a human so you can add it to that more textbook knowledge, let's call it that. It's not really textbook, it's
Hmm.
more than that,
Hmm.
but textbook knowledge, which is ingrained in the large language models. And that's very possible. So that's very possible. So the real question is, how do I take advantage of the tacit knowledge in humans' head? Experiential, viewpoint based on instinct, but then you have to be careful. A lot of the more you go that way, the more biased it is. And you have to work out, KOLs are very biased people, very experienced, so key opinion leaders, very experienced people, also very biased people. And you don't want systems which are massively biased unless you are designing to that person. So this is all design planning, design thinking. You can work through it, and it should be done. But it means that human can be captured and stuck as part of that machine, can be curated. That human knowledge can be created. It's not done very well today, though. That's
Hmm.
what Doris' point earlier. So this is going to take time. But so the human knowledge can be captured and brought in. and one should be actively, the tacit knowledge, actively going after that.
So this next one, I think, is based on something that you said earlier on. If companies are worried that better data will surface more compliance issues, how do you create incentives to use AI rather than avoid it?
Yeah, no, that's the problem, right? Because CEOs and COOs, I mean, they're all thickheads, right? They're all, you know, they got their job the hard way. They didn't get their job sitting there saying, "Sure, that sounds like a good idea."
Mm.
And at night they're wondering, how much stock am I going to get at the end of the year when I get my bonus? And I'm sorry for being brutal about it, but I came from the US, right? So if we don't think like over here, I've been 10 years back in the UK, but if we don't think like over here, but actually that's how the real world thinks. I think FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
It's straight
Yeah.
out. As soon as they get pinged, look at what happened when cloud came along. I was at IBM when cloud came along. Ginny Rometty was the CEO. So everybody was resisting. And suddenly, IBM is behind because AWS in 2012 won the CIA deal, AWS cloud, yada, yada, yada. And IBM sit there, sitting on their hands. So Ginny sends this email out saying, cloud first. We're all cloud first. We're cloud first. I mean, it's all FOMO playing into play. Yeah, everybody panics. When they panic, CEOs, COOs, we all panic. When we panic, we tend to push things into the system. So what did we see over the last couple of years? Everybody, these big biopharmers have got these big deals with Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it, but the FOMO effect causes them to take money from somewhere else where it probably is needed and stick it by putting Anthropic Claude behind the firewall or something, which is kind of no strategy, but panic. And that's what's going to create this. You have to see that FOMO kick in.
There always has to be a level of panic before you can actually get, especially large scale transformations, kind of
Because
get
what
them
happens is
underway
that
properly.
that's right, because it pushes it to the top 2 or 3 in their list, right? You need to be in front of the head. I think psychologists say that you have 2 lobes at the front of your head. You only remember 2 things coming out of a meeting. I've heard that before.
In my case, it's lucky if I remember 2 things coming out of 5 meetings than mind anything else. This one's specifically about large language models. So what is the most realistic role for LLMs in manufacturing over the next 2 to 3 years? So clearly, I think we both agree they have a long-term, huge impact to play, a huge role to play. But what about the shorter term? What about the next couple of years?
So no, it's a very good question. Again, I'm going to point everybody to that website which I created for this, which is in your system. I forgot what your system's called. What's the system called?
Sort code.
At the bottom under the speaker names, ai-mfg.vercel.app. Go there, especially for this panel session. And it has a timeline over the years. But my answer will be the same the answer I gave a few minutes ago, which is knowledge extraction, document extraction. It's a gift. These things are brilliant. They can reason. It's not just they can pull information from loads of documents. For example, if you're in the lab, they can pull a lot of information from ELNs, right? Massively, productive, super useful, right? But they can also reason and then work out okay, now what, or what else, and where do we go with this? And then you can add information on top of it. But you have to have workflow thinking. Do not go off and say, oh, cool, I'm going to go using an LLM and it's going to work. You have to engineer these things into place. That's one. And number 2 is if you want it behind the firewall, which is all possible, you have to kind of bring an open source behind the firewall because we're not all rich people, right? Bring an also source behind the firewall and then add something called a little knowledge base next to it, like a vector database. It's a little bit of engineering needed to make it work in a workflow manner if you can't just use Claude.ai app.
And I think it's a slightly different spin on the same sort of question area, but which pharma manufacturing departments offer the best first use cases for AI implementation with fast operational benefit and low GMP validation complexity?
Okay, so that's a manufacturing specific question, would you say?
Yeah, so looking broadly at the departments, I think.
Manufacturing, though. You said broadly, but then you're saying
manufacturing.
I think compliance auditing. I would say because you've got a lot of documentation going on there. It's similar to like if you go to legal world, they've got a whole parallel universe going on there with looking at documents, and with the large language models going on there. So where you have a lot of documents which you need to dissect, understand, and develop a very fast opinion, put them on a dashboard, there's a bit of workflow there. Large language models spot on because they'll be very, once engineered properly, a bit of guardrails and guidelines through prompt engineering, they'll be very good, absolutely spot on for this, and it's quite localized as well. So I know I was doing some auditing work, ELN auditing work, and that was exactly the problem. You don't have enough people to to audit the ELNs, so you create pipeline systems which when 99% of the work is done by large language models, you still have a human at the end, but they're looking at a dashboard which they can probe and understand across all the ELNs in that case.
And this one, I think, gets back to that point about digital twins being different things to different people.
Yes.
And how should pharma distinguish between genuine digital twins that improve decisions and digital twin projects that are really just expensive simulations with unclear business value?
Well, so I think you answered it in the question, right? The clarity on the business value. Those are customer requirements. So if you know your customer requirements, you know your business value. If you know your business value, you know what you're asking for.
Yeah.
So the real question is, I think the real question behind that is, how do we not get duped? Because it looks like it's going to do what we want, but it's a general system which how do we not go with the hype? It's very simple. These things are very easy to hack, to prototype. So you can get concept demos up in a week. I mean, I build concept demos in days, in hours actually, because these tools are so fast. So you can quickly, this iterative thing you mentioned earlier, Ian, you can quickly get a view on a concept demo. Is that going to help me or not? And that's a low cost, whether you're working internally or with an external consultant or external vendor. That's a very quick way to understand, is this thing going to be useful to me? You don't have to sign up for a project.
And it's interesting as well. I in an earlier wave of digital innovation, which was kind of the adoption of the spreadsheet, way back when I did a spreadsheet for pricing of products, which was just a model, and I made it very clear at the time, it's just a model, this isn't production ready. I think the business I was working for at the time is still using it. So sometimes these models that we build as prototypes end up
You have to
doing
be
real
careful
world
here.
stuff.
No, not quite, because these are concept demos which probably won't use real data because it costs money to plug into real data. So they'll use toy data, sterile data, synthetic data, but they'll aim at answering that question, that customer problem you're trying to solve, and you'll see. But also, more importantly, it'll help you understand, is that customer problem a problem you actually want to solve, or is it you're 5-10 degrees off and you need to actually tweak it? Iterative processes are super powerful. That's the relationship you want with anybody who's building anything, right? You have to assume what you're asking for is wrong. It's an instinct. I need this, but I don't know. And you've got to work with that level of vagueness. And they have to be able to throw something back at you and say, is this what you mean? But in a functional way, not a kind of a hard-coded way. No, that's just not a GUI UIX story. Forget all that rubbish. It does it, it's processing it, but it's not linked up to your system yet. Is this valuable to you? No, actually, could it do this? Right, give me an hour, I'll come back. Is this valuable? And that close relationship becomes super powerful.
And I think that's a good place to stop the session, because I think the thing that all of this always underlines to me whenever I talk about digital transformation is you've got to be certain of what kind of benefit that you're looking for at the end of the day. You start, because the easy thing is to be driven by shiny new technology, let's adopt it, you throw it in there, it doesn't work. So no matter what the technology, if you're going through digital transformation, there's a lot of work that goes beyond just plugging the system in.
And you're going to get there through iterative concept demos, which are iterative functional concept demos, which are easy to pull up, don't cost much time, don't involve plugging into your systems, don't involve people outside your department, and give you a good feel of, is that useful to me?
Thank you all for attending. That was an absolutely fantastic session. Ramindapal, it's always a joy to talk to you, as you know.
I love it. Thank you.
Zia, I'm sorry you couldn't join us. I know that you're actually watching. And that's the end for this one. Our next session is actually specifically on AI. So that will be starting in about half an hour or so.
And if, sorry, there are follow-up questions. If you email me, you go to that website, you can email me at the bottom of my email, reminderbarl@20visioneers15.com. I'm happy to answer any emails or any of these points. It's a pleasure to just help out. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, it's quite all right. So yes, next session is specifically on AI, and that one will start in about half an hour, I think. Fantastic to see you again, and let's draw a line under the session now.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.